They called it a strategic restructure. I called it what it was: theft, dressed in corporate language. I'd built the system they were about to sell to the government, but when the deal neared signing, they replaced me with someone who didn't even understand my code. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just walked out and into the one place they feared most, their competitor. Stay to the end. You'll see why silence can be the sharpest revenge. Subscribe and tell me, have you ever been replaced right before success? It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day when the office lights buzz louder than usual, when even the air feels suspiciously polite. Marcus Hale, our new CIO, called me into the glass conference room he'd started using as his personal stage. His assistant stood by the door, pretending not to listen. Marcus smiled with that managerial sympathy that always precedes a knife. "We're making strategic adjustments," he said. The phrase landed like a dull thud. I knew before he finished, someone was getting sacrificed. It was me. He slid a thin folder across the table, a single-page memo summarizing 10 years of my work into 2 sentences and 1 signature line. My role, he said, would be restructured. I wouldn't be leading the federal contract renewal, the one I'd built from the ground up, the one projected at $180 million. I'd be transitioning to an advisory capacity until the deal closed. I stared at the folder, then at him. His eyes didn't hold mine for long. They darted to the glass walls, checking whether anyone might see his mercy act. I signed without reading, because I already knew what it said. No amount of fine print could disguise what was really happening. They were cutting me out, cleanly, efficiently, right before my work paid off. My badge would still open doors. My email still work, but I was invisible now, erased in plain sight. I'd seen it happen to others. Older engineers, women who had built the foundation of systems that younger executives took credit for. I used to think I was immune because I was indispensable. Turns out being indispensable only delays the moment they decide they can live without you. The walk back to my desk felt longer than usual. Conversations hushed as I passed. Some of my team looked away, pretending to be busy. Others gave me small, guilty smiles, the kind people give when they're relieved it's not them. I cleared my files, logged out, and slid my security card into the drawer, a habit that had always made me feel in control. This time, it felt like surrender. Outside, the sun was bright, cruelly normal. I stood in the parking lot for a minute, watching cars pull out one by one, everyone heading home to dinners and families while I carried 10 years of silence in my chest. I thought about every weekend I'd missed, every midnight deployment I'd managed, every time I'd said, "I'll handle it," while others slept. It wasn't rage that hit me. It was clarity. The company had become a machine that consumed loyalty and produced excuses. I could have begged for my seat back, but I'd already learned the rule. Once they label you expendable, you can never earn your way back. So I didn't try. I didn't go back to my desk, or my title, or the team I'd built. I didn't go back at all. I went in a different direction. Before Marcus arrived, Helion Dynamics wasn't perfect, but it was predictable. I had built my place there through quiet competence, 10 years of patching other people's mistakes, rewriting their code, and keeping systems alive through crises no one outside engineering ever heard about. My biggest project, the federal contract renewal, had started as a small security upgrade. I'd turned it into a full-scale infrastructure overhaul that cut vulnerabilities by 40%. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was solid, measurable, the kind of achievement that should have secured my future. Then came Marcus, the kind of executive who treated technology like theater. Big words, clean slides, zero comprehension. He brought his own people, consultants who quoted management books and measured success in buzzwords. He told me once that engineers like me were the plumbing, necessary but unseen. That was when I began documenting everything: system logs, design decisions, my architecture notes, even the timestamps of when changes went live. Not for revenge, just insurance. I'd watched too many talented people lose everything because they couldn't prove what they'd built. When Helion started its strategic efficiency phase, a sanitized term for layoffs wrapped in smiles, I knew the target was shifting. Still, I stayed, hoping logic would matter more than politics. It didn't. After that Thursday meeting, I went home, opened my laptop, and reread an email I'd ignored 2 weeks earlier from an old colleague, Dana Pierce. We'd worked together years before at a small startup that Helion eventually absorbed. Dana had gone to a competitor, Vantaris Systems. Back then, Vantaris was a minor player, smart but underfunded, the kind of company that Helion's executives dismissed with the arrogance of scale. Her message had been simple. "We're building something ambitious. You'd like it here." I hadn't replied because leaving felt like betrayal. But now, sitting in my apartment surrounded by boxes of notes and a career turned irrelevant, it felt like an invitation. I didn't write back immediately. I spent 3 nights researching Vantaris, its projects, clients, funding rounds. They'd just landed a contract to modernize secure data infrastructure for regional governments, smaller than Helion's federal bid, but similar enough to overlap. I knew I could help them accelerate, if they wanted me. By Sunday morning, I drafted a single-line email. "Let's talk." We met at a cafe halfway between our offices, a quiet corner place that smelled like espresso and exhaustion. Dana looked older, sharper, eyes that had learned to navigate failure. "They did it to you too," she said before I could start. I didn't have to ask what she meant. We talked for hours, not about pay or titles, but about architecture, efficiency, and building systems that didn't collapse under ego. Vantaris didn't have Helion's budget, but it had clarity. Fewer politics, more purpose. I didn't ask for a contract right away. I wanted to see the product, the culture, the truth behind the pitch. They sent me sample architecture diagrams that night, and I knew instantly where the holes were. I spent the next 2 days drafting an improvement plan free of charge. By Wednesday, they offered me a lead architect position and partial equity. I accepted without hesitation. Helion had taught me loyalty was transactional. At Vantaris, I decided to treat competence as currency. My first weeks there felt like breathing after years underwater. The engineers were younger, curious, hungry. They didn't care about titles, only results. We worked late, ate takeout, argued over frameworks, and laughed when something broke. It reminded me of why I'd become an engineer in the first place. Not to climb a ladder, but to build something that worked. I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone. I didn't update LinkedIn or send farewell messages. Let them wonder. Revenge wasn't my motive. Not yet. At that point, I just wanted to create something that proved how wrong they'd been. But deep down, I think I already knew. The best way to fight back wasn't to destroy them. It was to build something they couldn't compete with. The seeds were planted, and all I had to do was let them grow. The first 6 months at Vantaris felt like rewiring my own brain. Gone were the endless approval chains, the meetings about meetings, the obsession with optics over output. Here, what mattered was the code and the clarity of thought behind it. I was given full control over the architecture for our new defense-grade security platform, Project Helion. The name was poetic, but the intent was sharp. We were designing a live adaptive cybersecurity mesh that could outthink intrusion attempts in real time. It was ambitious, maybe reckless, but it was mine. The CEO, a quiet man named Adrian Wells, didn't hover or grandstand. He just said, "Show me what Helion would never approve," and walked out. That sentence alone was fuel enough. I began rebuilding what I'd once proposed at Helion, but was told was too experimental. At Vantaris, no one called innovation a liability. We built small, agile teams, 6 engineers per module, total transparency, 0 hierarchy. Every late night in that small warehouse-turned-office reminded me of what creation was supposed to feel like before corporate metrics strangled it. There were no corporate slogans here, just caffeine, arguments, and a collective obsession with getting it right. I didn't seek revenge consciously, but every time I improved a process that Helion had dismissed, it felt like tightening a screw in a larger machine they wouldn't see coming. By month 4, our prototype ran internal breach simulations at twice the speed of Helion's flagship product. I knew because I still had access to their public performance documentation, which boasted numbers that now looked laughable. We weren't just competing, we were quietly rewriting the standard. I didn't tell my team that I'd been the lead on Helion's older infrastructure. It would have changed how they saw me. To them, I was just Janice, the architect who asked hard questions and didn't tolerate lazy logic. But when we reached our first live deployment milestone, I couldn't help the small satisfaction that came from knowing my old company was about to notice the ripple. A journalist wrote a tech brief comparing emerging cybersecurity trends, mentioning Vantaris' sudden progress and radical efficiency. 2 days later, Helion's analytics team downloaded our white paper 3 times from 3 different accounts. They were watching. Good. The closer we got to the government bid cycle, the more real it became that our paths would cross. The same $180 million contract Helion had once prepared me to lead was being reopened for competitive proposals. Normally, smaller firms didn't stand a chance, but Vantaris had something no one else did. A live adaptive mesh that functioned flawlessly. We ran silent demos for potential clients under NDAs, and the results were staggering. Real-time neutralization, minimal data loss, full traceability. When Adrian presented the prototype to our board, he didn't use my name, just the numbers. I preferred it that way. The less attention on me, the longer the surprise would hold. In the evenings, I'd scroll through industry updates, watching Helion's press releases grow more desperate. They bragged about hiring new leadership, announcing innovative resilience frameworks, which were just glossy versions of ideas they'd rejected years earlier. Marcus Hale, of course, was quoted in every article. "We remain at the forefront of cyber innovation," he said in one, smiling for the camera with a confidence that only ignorance allows. I kept a copy of that article on my desktop, not as motivation, but as evidence of what they still didn't understand. Innovation isn't born in boardrooms. It lives in the quiet work of people they overlook. By the end of the 6th month, Vantaris had scaled to double its team and secured pre-qualification for the federal bid. We were the only competitor within 10% of Helion's capacity. The final presentation would be a head-to-head technical evaluation, winner take all. No press, no theatrics, just performance. I didn't plan to reveal my connection, but I knew the architecture would do it for me. Every signature in the code, every efficiency pattern, they'd recognize my fingerprint the moment they saw the system run. It wasn't vengeance I wanted anymore. It was precision. The satisfaction of proving, without a single word, that the future they'd rejected was already standing right in front of them, wearing a different logo. The final pitch was scheduled for a Monday morning at a federal complex outside D.C., one of those government buildings that smelled faintly of carpet glue and bureaucracy. We'd been preparing for months, testing every component, refining every metric, running simulations until we could predict every outcome. The stakes were brutal. A 10-year cybersecurity contract worth $180 million. Only 2 finalists remained, Helion Dynamics and Vantaris Systems. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent a decade preparing Helion for this very bid, only to return under a different banner, leading the team they'd once dismissed. The day before the pitch, Adrian called me into his office. He looked calm, but his eyes were calculating. "You're presenting the architecture demo," he said. "We want them to see what they missed, even if they don't realize it yet." I nodded, though my stomach tightened. I hadn't stood in front of that many executives since my Helion days, and back then, I was always the one in the background, explaining technicalities while someone else took the credit. Not this time. This time, they would hear my voice. We flew in Sunday night. I barely slept. At 6 a.m., I was reviewing final scripts in a bland hotel room when I saw the news alert. Helion had issued a press statement claiming unprecedented confidence in their upcoming government presentation. Marcus Hale's face filled the photo, smug and photogenic, his quote beneath it about setting new standards in adaptive defense. I almost laughed. He didn't even know what adaptive meant. He was about to find out. The presentation room was a cavernous auditorium with 2 projection walls and a row of defense officials seated behind laptops. Each company had 90 minutes, 45 for presentation, 45 for Q&A and system demonstration. Helion went first. I sat quietly at the back, dressed in neutral black, unrecognized. Marcus strutted through his opening slides with his trademark confidence, delivering buzzwords like they were scripture: strategic resilience, real-time automation, proactive containment. The panelists nodded politely, unimpressed. Then came their live demo, a simulation of a breach scenario. The system handled it adequately, but its lag times were visible. I knew those weaknesses intimately. They were baked into the very architecture I'd once designed, and they'd refused to evolve. When their final slide faded, there was polite applause. Marcus looked pleased with himself. Then it was our turn. Adrian introduced me simply as our lead architect. I stepped forward, plugged in my drive, and let the system load. "Good morning," I began. "We built Halcyon not just to defend, but to learn. No theatrics, no buzzwords, just truth." I initiated the demo. On the screens, simulated intrusions began cascading like a waterfall. Thousands of simultaneous breach attempts. Our system reacted instantly, tracing attack origins, rerouting data flow, sealing vulnerabilities, and self-optimizing mid-process. Within seconds, the network graph stabilized, blue threads replacing red, balance restored. The room was silent except for the hum of processors. One of the evaluators leaned forward. "What's your response latency?" he asked. "Average of 22 milliseconds," I replied. He blinked. Helion's demo had averaged 180. I walked them through the logic, the adaptive engine, the distributed risk model, the zero-trust micro-segmentation. Every term, every improvement had once been dismissed as too complex by the very executives now sitting across from me. When the session ended, the panel clapped, not politely this time, but with genuine energy. Adrian thanked them and began packing up. I turned to leave, but a voice stopped me. "Excuse me, what was your name again?" It was one of the evaluators, an older man with silver hair and a badge marked Federal Procurement. I smiled. "Janice Rowe." He nodded. "You were with Helion, weren't you?" A pause. "Until they decided efficiency was more valuable than experience," I said evenly. His smile was small but knowing. Behind him, I could see Marcus's face through the glass wall of the waiting area, pale and frozen. He'd recognized me. The satisfaction wasn't loud or cinematic. It was quiet, surgical. That was the moment I understood the beauty of precision revenge. No shouting, no spectacle, just inevitability. By the next afternoon, the results came through. Vantaris had won the contract. The announcement was brief, factual, devastating. Following competitive evaluation, the Department of Defense awards the cybersecurity modernization contract to Vantaris Systems for its superior real-time adaptive defense framework. I didn't celebrate publicly. We went back to our hotel, shared a muted toast, and got back to work. But that night, when I opened my email, there it was, an unread message from Marcus Hale. Subject line, "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about building something so undeniable that their loss became self-inflicted. And Helion had just cut its own throat with the same arrogance that once dismissed me. The first call came 2 days after the announcement. Blocked number 8:14 a.m. I didn't need to see who it was. Helion had gone silent for 24 hours, and silence from them was never peace. It was panic. The second call came from a familiar area code. I let it ring. The third time, my inbox lit up with an email from Marcus. Subject, opportunity for discussion. The message was painfully formal. Janice, in light of recent developments, we would like to explore potential avenues for collaboration and strategic reintegration. Reintegration. They couldn't even say the word return. I stared at it for a long time, wondering whether he typed it himself or had someone from PR ghostwrite his humility. Either way, I deleted it without opening the attachment. By noon, the internal leaks had started circulating across the tech industry. Word spread fast. Helion's bid loss had shaken investor confidence. Contracts were under review, and their stock had dipped 12% in 2 days. On LinkedIn, people were already speculating about leadership restructuring. I didn't post or like or comment. I simply changed my profile to private. Let curiosity do the rest. That night, Adrian called me from the Vantaris office. "They'll offer you anything," he said. "Titles, bonuses, the works. Don't even think about it." "I won't," I said. "I'm done working for people who confuse exploitation for leadership." He laughed softly. "You're colder than they deserve." "No," I said. "Just finished." But even finished things echo. Over the next week, I received messages from old Helion colleagues. Quiet congratulations, cautious admiration, and a few guilt-laced apologies. One wrote, "You were right all along, we should have backed you." I didn't reply. Regret isn't currency I trade in anymore. The irony was that my silence made more noise than any press release could. Investors noticed who I was with now. Journalists began connecting names. And soon, the story broke in a subtle line at the end of a financial column. Key architect behind Vantaris' winning proposal previously led Helion's infrastructure modernization. Just like that, the narrative rewrote itself. The woman they sidelined had become the architect of their defeat. One evening, I scrolled through Helion's careers page out of idle curiosity. Marcus's profile was still there, still smiling, still pretending stability. The next morning, news hit that he'd resigned to pursue personal ventures. I closed the tab, opened a blank document, and began drafting the next stage of Project Halcyon's rollout. I didn't need to savor his fall. I'd already moved past it. Some victories don't demand applause. They just require distance. The weeks after Helion's collapse felt quieter than I expected. No headlines screaming my name, no dramatic courtroom battles, just a gradual fading of their presence in the industry that once revolved around them. People inside told me the usual story. Projects suspended, executives resigning, investors circling like sharks pretending to be allies. I didn't feel joy or pity. What I felt was distance, a kind of clarity that only comes when the noise stops. Vantaris grew faster than any of us predicted. Our first government deployment ran without a single breach in 90 days. Then came private contracts, banks, medical networks, infrastructure systems that demanded trust more than reputation. Each new client pushed us to refine, evolve, perfect. I led the architecture division but refused any title that started with chief. Titles were what ruined Helion, symbols of ego disguised as leadership. I preferred to work behind the firewall, shaping systems while others handled the spotlight. My team understood the mission: build something that lasts longer than politics. Sometimes, late at night in the office, I'd look around at the rows of engineers, young, sharp, laughing at bugs they'd just fixed, and think about how far I'd come from those sterile boardrooms where innovation was a slogan. Here, every keystroke mattered, every decision left a trace. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was restoration. One afternoon, Dana dropped by my workspace holding a printout of a press release. "Helion filed for restructuring," she said, setting it down. The article was short: layoffs, asset liquidation, a statement about reassessing market focus. Their logo, once plastered on skyscrapers, now looked like a relic. I read it once and pushed it aside. "You don't even want to frame it?" she asked. "Proof of victory?" "No," I said. "Proof of waste." She smiled but didn't argue. The truth was, I didn't destroy Helion. They did it themselves when they chose short-term optics over long-term integrity, when they mistook fear for leadership. I simply stepped out of the blast radius before the detonation. My life now is smaller but sharper. I wake up without dread, design without politics, speak only when it matters. The systems I build protect people who'll never know my name, and that's enough. Sometimes I still get messages from engineers trapped in companies like Helion asking how to survive. I tell them what I've learned the hard way. Don't wait for validation. Build your own version of it. I didn't take them down. I just stopped carrying them. They collapsed under their own weight. The story spread faster than I ever intended. Someone from procurement leaked the bid results to a trade forum, and within days the thread became a gathering place for engineers comparing their own scars. They fired me a week before my bonus. They deleted my access before I could save my work. They told me I was redundant, then posted my job 2 days later. I read every comment, each one a mirror of the same betrayal, each one a quiet echo of my past. I didn't reply at first. I wasn't sure what to say that wouldn't sound self-righteous. But one night, after scrolling through another string of exhausted voices, I typed, "You're not powerless. Document everything. Read every clause. Don't let them convince you loyalty is ownership." I hit send and closed the laptop, thinking nothing more of it. By morning, the post had hundreds of replies. Some thanked me. Some asked how to find a lawyer like Lydia. Others said they were finally walking away from places that had ground them down for years. That was when it clicked. My fight wasn't unique. It was just visible. I started answering questions directly, breaking down contract traps in plain language, explaining what vesting at close of business really means, how to negotiate IP rights, when to refuse NDAs. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. A few months later, Dana convinced me to turn those late-night explanations into something tangible, a small platform for engineers to share stories and find real legal guidance. We called it Reforge, because sometimes you don't rebuild, you reshape. It's strange, watching a single act of defiance become a map for others. I don't romanticize what happened. It cost me peace, sleep, and nearly my faith in fairness. But now, when messages come from strangers saying, "Your story gave me the courage to fight back," I realize maybe that's the real ending. Not revenge, not collapse, but a quiet chain reaction of people refusing to be erased. Looking back, I learned that revenge isn't always fire. It's architecture. It's the deliberate rebuilding of your life so solidly that the people who underestimated you can only watch from the rubble of their own choices. I used to think justice meant payback, but what I really wanted was proof. Proof that integrity and quiet competence still matter in a world that rewards noise. Sometimes we confuse silence with weakness, but silence, when timed right, can be strategy. I didn't destroy them. I simply stopped feeding their power with my energy, my fear, and my validation. That's what real freedom looks like, stepping away from people and systems that thrive on control. Forgiveness, for me, isn't about excusing them. It's about refusing to let their story define the rest of mine. And yes, sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. The truth is, you won't always get an apology. You won't always get closure. But you can choose to rise so high that their absence becomes irrelevant. In a culture that glorifies constant hustle and loyalty to the wrong people, the hardest, most radical act might be knowing when to walk away and build something of your own. How to get started today. Revisit your employment or client contracts. Read every word like it's your paycheck, because it is. Keep proof of your work, dates, projects, outcomes. Documentation is your shield. Find one area of your life where you've been undervalued and start reclaiming control, whether it's your job, your time, or your self-worth. Replace the urge for reaction with redirection. Put that anger into building something that can't be taken from you. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment if you've ever had to rebuild quietly. And don't forget to subscribe. More stories of strength and smart revenge are coming.